Years, I've spent the last 30 years being in meetings. I've spent the last couple of years trying to make sense out of them, to understand why they go bad so often. I've observed meetings, I've interviewed a lot of people. I want to help enhance your skill set. There are some basic rules for running meetings. They're not rocket science, they're pretty straightforward, but we all honor them in the breach, unfortunately. We don't follow them often enough. But more importantly, I want to change your mindset, because I think that's why we don't use the basic principles for running meetings often enough. Why are meetings so important? Here's the first basic idea. Statement by Alan Weber when he was the editor of the Harvard Business Review a number of years ago, and I'll read it to you. The manager's job in the new economy is to create an environment that allows knowledge workers to learn from their own experience, from each other, and from customers, suppliers, and business partners. The chief management tool that makes that happen is conversation. We all do it all the time. I'm doing it right now. You've been doing it all day. We don't think about it as a skill or even as an art, because we do it all the time. And yet it's the essence, particularly in the knowledge economy, of the way we share ideas, the way we learn. Meetings are also important because, as I alluded to a moment ago, there are meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings. Almost every organization spends a good chunk of its day every day in meetings. There are over 15 million meetings every day in the United States, and there's at least that many outside the United States. So that is the essence of the knowledge economy today. Meetings are also important because they're very expensive. They consume incredible amount of organizational resources. Rick Gilbert, who is a Bay Area native and another member of the National Speakers Association, has estimated that an executive committee meeting can cost $30,000 an hour. If you add up not only the salaries and the space cost, but the time of preparation and all the people who were involved in supporting that meeting, it can cost that much. So, given that, why are there so many bad meetings? Well, I have a couple of quick ideas I want to share with you. First, the world has changed. We can now, in three very fundamental ways, we can now communicate with just about anybody else on the planet at almost no incremental cost. This is really unprecedented. We can access just about any information, no matter where it is, without needing to schedule it ahead of time. You type the keywords into Google and you've got what you need. It's really a remarkable thing, and it's only 10 or 15 years old, and yet we all take it for granted today. It's the way we live, and yet it's unprecedented in human history. And then thirdly, any one of us can publish information that's accessible to the entire world. Traditionally, meetings have been called to inform people about something, to tell people things, and many leaders still do that very often. And yet, there's all kinds of ways to provide that information without calling everybody together in a room. Secondly, it's way too easy to call a meeting. Most middle managers, project team managers and so on, have some kind of an expense limit on how much money they can spend without getting approval from a higher up. Yet they can call a meeting for 5 or 10 or 15 people at a moment's notice and consume several $1,000s worth of organizational resources right there. And there's very little accountability for it. Thirdly, the purpose is rarely clear. I can't tell you how many times, as I said before, I've sat in meetings where I had no idea why I was there or what we were trying to accomplish. And that's all too often the case in practice. And lastly, for now, I don't think we really know how to talk to each other that well, and I really should have this say with each other, because it's collaborative conversations are joint efforts. And we're not very good at listening, and that's a very broad generalization. I'm sure you're better at it than I am. But it is a problem that we have to learn to deal with. Again, most leaders have an assumption that the reason they've called people together is for people to listen to them. Leaders are not the best listeners in the world. Fancy. I developed this powerful framework. Frankly, it's quite simple. What is the purpose of the meeting that you're about to convene? Who are the participants? Who do you need to be in the meeting? What is the process by which you will get from the beginning of the meeting to the end of the meeting, how you will achieve your purpose? And finally, what is the place where the meeting will take place? Purpose, participants, process, and place. As I said, it's really not rocket science, and yet we seem to forget these basics all the time. But there's also, the plus in this model is preparation. All too often, meetings just get started without any really adequate preparation. Now, I want to just take a moment and run through those four. Now, the last part of this is preparation, and in some ways, as I said before, it may be the most important. Think about those other 4 Ps before you start the meeting. Be intentional. But I also want to offer a word of caution. It's possible to be overly prepared. And there's a real risk of being over-prepared and not being flexible and being willing to go with the moment. I heard recently, interestingly enough, that a commercial airplane flying on autopilot is off course 98% of the time. Think about that. If the plane was locked in to one direction or one destination, the winds and the variability in the atmosphere that it's surrounded by would knock it down, would knock it off course. When we think of leadership, most of us think of a command and control like a military officer, like General Patton. The model that we need to embrace today is a collaborative leadership model, personified for me by Tony Hsieh, who is the CEO of Zappos, the online shoe company. He wrote a book called Delivering Happiness, and he's instituting a management model in which there's literally no one in the organization at Zappos with a title manager. They run by a constitution. It governs him as well as everybody else in the organization. And what we need to build today is a mindset where you walk into a meeting believing in your heart that nobody is smarter than everybody. It's the collaborative, it's the cumulative skills and experience and insights of everyone in the room that can contribute to making something really happen.